In this block challenge video, I'm going to show you how you can use Wicked Block Builder to create an accordion block that looks the same in the editor as it does on the front end. So let's start by adding a new block. I'll call it Accordion. And I'm going to enable the wide alignment option. This is optional. This is just a personal preference for how I want my block to look. So first thing we need to do is add some attributes to hold our block's data. So since we're going to create an accordion that will have multiple items, I'm going to add an array attribute, and I'm going to call it items. And for each item in the accordion block, I want each item to have a headline and some content. So I'll add 2 string attributes for those things. All right, so that's it for our attributes. Next, we need to create the markup for our block. So I'm going to make my block a div, and I'm going to call it FAQs block, since I'm planning to use it as to display a list of frequently asked questions, just as an example. And so let's see. So within this div, I'm just kind of using this as a wrapper. I'm going to make the actual FAQ list an unordered list. I'll add a class and call it FAQs. You can call these things whatever you want. This is just how I've created the CSS ahead of time, and so these are just the class names I used, and so I'm just using these classes to style the block. Okay, so for each item in the accordion, I want to output a list item. So I'm going to add a repeater, and this will loop through whatever array we have it assigned to. So I'll assign it to the items array, or attribute, sorry. And okay, let's output a list item for each FAQ. And then within that, I'm going to want a rich text so we can enter our headline. I'm going to make it an H2, and I'll turn off formatting just because I want it to look consistent. And I'm going to assign a class to this as well, just so we can style it. I'm going to call this question input. And now we need our answer. So what I'm going to do is add a div for that. And I'm going to give this a class of answer container. And to that div, I'll add a rich text component that will let us input the answer, which I guess I called content. Okay, we'll just make this a div and then set the multi-line tag to P. And so what this means is if you press enter while in this rich text area, it's going to insert or create a new paragraph. If we had left it blank, it'll default to insert a line break when you click enter. Okay, and we'll leave some formatting turned on here. And we'll give this a class as well. We'll call this answer. Okay, so let's just take a look at it. I haven't added any styling, so it'll probably look pretty ugly, but let's just see what it looks like. Okay, so here's our accordion block. Don't really see anything because it doesn't have any items, but let's add one item. And an answer. Okay. And this is what it looks like on the front end. So no styling applied yet. It's just outputting an unordered list, and then our answer is wrapped in a couple divs. So let's add the CSS and see what it looks like. So I've gone ahead and created the CSS ahead of time, so you don't have to watch me type it out. And what the CSS does is basically just formats the list so that it kind of resembles an accordion. But we've also added some CSS that will do a couple other things as well, which is, let's see, where is it? So what I've gone ahead and done is I've actually changed the answer container div that holds our answer. I've set the max height to 0, which will hide it. But then I've added a rule here that when the block is selected, it will increase the max height. So what this will do is when the block is not selected in the editor, it will allow us to see a preview of how the accordion will look on the front end. So all the items will be collapsed, but obviously you wouldn't be able to edit the answers if the accordion was always collapsed. So what I've done is created this rule so that when you click into the accordion, this is selected class is something that WordPress adds to your block when it's selected in the editor. This will increase the max height and you'll be able to see the answer. So let's see what it looks like. Okay, so here's what it's looking like on the back end now. If we click into it, now we can get to we can edit our headline, but we can also get to our answer so that we can edit it. But then when we click out, we see a decent preview of what it'll look like on the front end. Let's just check the front end and see if it looks similar. Okay, so it does look similar, but it's not correct yet, and we can't see our answer, and we can't toggle our answer either. So to accomplish the toggle, what I'm going to do is use some CSS, and what I'm going to do is add a label and a checkmark box that we can use to, or that we can toggle on and off, and then we'll add a CSS selector that when that checkbox is toggled, then the answer will be displayed, and we'll hide the checkbox off screen so that it's not visible, but when you toggle it, it will toggle the answer. So I've actually already created the CSS for that, so we don't actually need to do that. So you can see, like, let's see, down here it says input checked, followed by the question. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong one. Where is it? Oh, here we go. When the input's checked, or checkbox that is, followed by the answer container, then it also increases the max height here so that the answer is visible. So just like we did with the editor with is selected, making the answer visible when the block is selected. So we need to add our checkbox and our label. So I want the checkbox to come first. So I'll add it. Whoops, sorry. In this case, we actually have to checkboxes. The checkboxes component is for adding checkboxes to your block that can be used to for data input. It's not actually output on the front end, so we actually have to create an HTML input tag ourselves. So change the tag to input, and then I'll add an attribute for the type and set it to checkbox. And we also need a way to, when we click the label, to toggle this checkbox. So we're going to tie or give this checkbox an ID so that we can reference it in the label. So I'll call it checkbox hyphen, and then we want to make it unique. In theory, this block could be added multiple times to a page, so we need to make it unique for each block. There's an attribute called block ID that you can use for that, so we'll insert the block ID. But there's also multiple checkboxes within each block for each item in our items attribute. So I'll add another hyphen, and then I'm going to use the current index attribute of the items array. So as it goes through each item in the array, the index increments and will increase. So this will give each checkbox a unique ID. Okay, so we've got our checkbox. Next we need to add a label. I'll do another, whoops. Another custom HTML tag, call this one, change it to a label. And we need to link it to our checkbox, so we'll add a for attribute and then enter in the same ID that we use for our checkbox. Lastly, we want to output our headline in our label. So for the label's content, I'm going to set that to the item headline. And let's just take a look at it and see what it looks like now. Okay, so now we're seeing our rich text component that lets us make changes to the text. And then we're also seeing our label that's also outputting the headline, but this is not editable, it's just a label. Okay, so what we need to do is add a little bit of conditional logic so that we only show the rich text component when the block is selected and we want to be able to edit it. Otherwise, we'll display the label. And we also want to hide the label when the block is being edited so that there isn't this duplication. So let's add some conditional logic to the rich text. And we'll only show that when the block is selected. Now for our label, I think what I had done is I'd actually created a class for this, I think. Yeah, I called this one question, so we'll just kind of make the styling look a little better. Okay, and then we want to add some conditions here, or a condition. We only want this to appear when the block is not selected. So, and block is selected is always false on the front end. So this means that this label will be output on the front end, whereas the rich text, it will only be output when the block is edited. This is only true on the back end, or sorry, when the block is selected. So this will not appear on the front end. Okay, so let's see what it looks like now. Okay, so looking pretty good. If we click into it, it expands, shows us our answer, and we can edit our headline as well as make changes to our answer. And let's see what it looks like on the front end. Okay, so if we click out of our block, this is how it looks on the back end. Sorry, not sure why the selection isn't going away. There we go. This is how it looks on the back end, and this is how it looks on the front end. So pretty close resemblance. There's a few more things though that we can do just to improve this. You may have noticed that when we first added the block to the page, it just showed up kind of empty. So it's a little hard to know what this is, or maybe if you're building a site for a client, they might not know what to do when they see this block. So one thing we could do is add a little message to give some instructions when the block doesn't have any items, just to kind of help guide the user. Something else we can do too is give some labels to our repeater controller so that instead of just saying items, maybe we want to use this accordion for an FAQ list, so we could rename this to FAQs. And then for each item in the list, instead of saying item 1, item 2, we'll actually set the headline to be the label so that it's easy to know which one is which. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is change those labels. So I'm going to click on the repeater, and I'm going to change the label to FAQs. Change the item label to headline, then add FAQ. And then the other thing we talked about was displaying a message if the block doesn't have any items, to kind of help guide the user. So I'm going to add a div for this. And I previously created a CSS class called placeholder for it, just to kind of give it some styling. And for this div's content, I'm just going to type in a message. This way, the person knows what to do when they see the block or add it to the page. And lastly, what I want to do is I only want this placeholder message to be displayed when the block is empty. So let's add a condition that checks the number of items in the list. So when the items attribute, let's see, whoops, sorry, I want to check the length, excuse me. So when this is less than one item, or you could say equal to 0, another way, but when it's less than 1, that's when we want to output it. So meaning when there's no items in this block, then we'll display this message. Once there's 1 or more items, we'll hide it. Or not output it, I should say. Okay, so let's take a look now. Oops, that didn't work. So what happened? Let's take a look at our placeholder. Whoops, sorry about that. This should say is less than 1. Okay, we only want to output this when there is less than 1 item. Sorry about that, not sure what I was thinking there. So let's try refreshing. Okay, so here's our block added to the page. It doesn't have any FAQs, so we see our little message once we click into it. Tells us to use the toolbar or the sidebar, so we can add an FAQ here, or we can add one over here. And we can add some questions and answers. Okay, so now we have our labels for our repeater. We have our item label, so it's easy to see which one is which, and so if we need to like reorder them or anything, it's very easy to do because we know which item we're working with. And then if we click outside the block, everything's hidden, and we see a good preview of what it's going to look like on the front end. And if we refresh the front end, this is what we see, and when we click on this, what this is doing, this is our label that's being output. So when we click on it, it's toggling our hidden checkbox. And then the CSS is checking if is displaying the answer if the checkbox is checked. Otherwise, when it's not, it's hidden. So this is just one way you can create an accordion. There's lots of other different ways you can use conditional logic and CSS, or even JavaScript if you wanted, to create your own custom accordion. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks.